We are looking at the life of Jesus, and we've started in Luke chapter 1, and we've got as far as Luke chapter 20. If you have a Bible, I invite you to join along. We're in chapter 20, beginning in verse 20. Jesus is now in the last week of his life. He is ridden in on a colt, according to prophecy that he had fulfilled just a day earlier. And in doing so, he made a declaration that he was the Messiah, that he was the one that the Jews had been longing for, the deliverer, the one that was going to free them from their sin. They had rejected him, and now he had entered into the temple, and this is wild. He goes into the court of the Gentiles, guys, which would have been the biggest area in the whole temple precinct, and he just starts to clean it out. He chases out the money changers, chases out those that are selling doves, and he says, "You guys have made my house into a den of thieves." Now, what's significant about that is it was supposed to be a place of prayer, but they had changed a place of worship, a place of prayer, into a place of bargaining and the place of charging people in order to worship God. And God was not impressed with it for 1 minute. He chases them out, and then he is there healing the lame and the blind. People were coming, and the religious leaders come to Jesus, and they say, "Jesus, who gave you the authority to do what you just did?" And Jesus very, very wittingly, I just love Jesus's approach to all of this. He says, "Who gave you the authority?" He goes, "Look, I'll answer your question if you answer my question. You answer this question. Did John's baptism come from heaven, or did it come from man?" And they wouldn't answer Jesus, because if they said it came from heaven, then they were really indicting their own lives. But if they said it came from men, then all of the people would have turned on them, because everybody believed that John had come from heaven and that he was a prophet. And so he had put them in a very awkward position, and they just said, "We plead the fifth. We don't want to answer you." And Jesus goes, "I'm not going to answer you either." Now, this is what happens. They leave that, and they begin to plot how to trap Jesus, and they think, you know what we'll do? We'll do the same thing Jesus did to us. We're going to ask him a question that is going to put him in that same predicament that he put us in. They think they're going to flip it on Jesus, right? And so that's where we pick up. Notice verse 19. We read it last week. It just kind of give you the perspective. Verse 19 of chapter 20. "The chief priests, the scribes, that very hour sought to lay hands on Jesus, but they feared the people, for they knew he had spoken this parable against them. So," verse 20, "they watched him. And they sent spies who pretended to be righteous, that they might seize on his words in order to deliver him to the power and to the authority of the governor," and that would have been a Roman governor. "And they asked him, saying, 'Teacher, we know that you say and teach rightly. You do not show partiality or personal favoritism, but you teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?' And Jesus perceived their craftiness, and he said to them, 'Why do you test me? Show me a denarius. Whose image and inscription does it have?' And they answered and said, 'Caesar's.' And Jesus said to them, 'Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's.' But they could not catch him in his words in the presence of the people, and they marveled at his answer and did not talk again." They kept silent. You got to love Jesus' approach, right? You think about what's going on in this situation. They're watching Jesus. They're just kind of trying to find an angle to come against Jesus as they watched him, and they sent spies to pretend to be righteous. And I think a very important lesson right at the beginning of this is that you can't pretend anything with Jesus. He sees right through all of it. We all try to pretend to be something that we're not when we come to God. You just be real. Because he sees it all anyway. You're not going to fool God. You're not going to fake him. You're not going to juke him. You're not going to go, oh, God, I was going to do that. You thought I was going to do that. God sees right through all of it. He knows. And these guys come to Jesus and they think, you know what we'll send a spy. Matthew tells us in his account of the same story, Matthew tells us that they had conspired with the Herodians. And it'll make sense here in a second. You see, when it comes to the Herodians, they were on the side of Herod the Great. And Herod was, and his family line, these guys were the ones who were ruling and reigning over Israel in that day. And the Herodians had made an allegiance to the political party of Herod. They were happy to be under the rule of Rome. And in doing so, they thought, man, we're way better off that the Romans are here. We have roads, we have luxuries, we have better economic situation. And then the Herodians were the ones who were in the ruling class within the temple. And so these guys were benefiting from Rome being in position. But they were very liberal in their approach to Scripture. The Pharisees, on their other hand, would have been more of the right-wingers, right? They were to the letter, to the T, follow the rules, keep the commandments. And you had two people that were in opposite belief systems. You had the liberals and you had the conservatives. You had the right wing and the left wing. And these guys were enemies with each other. But you know what makes friends? If you have a common enemy. You have someone that you hate more than the guy that you hate. And that's exactly what's going on here. They hated Jesus more than they hated each other. And so they were now going to combine forces. And they think if we can trap Jesus, and here's what we'll do. We'll take the Herodians with us, and if Jesus says that you're not to pay tax to Caesar, the Herodians will run and tell Herod. And they'll have Jesus arrested and they'll take him away. But if Jesus turns around and says that we are to pay taxes to Caesar, then all of the people will turn on Jesus. Because many in Judaism believed that the Roman rule over them was an abomination. And so they thought, man, we got Jesus trapped. We'll just notice how they approached Jesus. They wanted to kind of flatter him before they do anything. And remember the words? Teacher, we know that you say and teach rightly, and you do not show personal favoritism, but you teach the way of God in truth. Here's what they're saying. Jesus, we know you're a straight shooter. We're going to ask you this question, and you're just going to tell us like it is. It was flattery. And they thought in their flattery that they were going to kind of get Jesus to do what they were looking for him to do. You guys... I heard of what flattery is. I read a definition. I thought it was great. It was from a commentator, Kent Hughes. He said this: flattery is the reverse mirror image of gossip. Gossip involves saying behind a person's back what you would never say to his face. Flattery is saying to a person's face what you would never say behind his back. That's good. They would have never said Jesus was a good teacher, or that he was a straight shooter, or that he was a good guy behind his back, because they didn't believe that. But in front of his face, going, Jesus, we know you're a right guy. You're a straight shooter. You're just going to lay it on the line with us, Jesus. And they're thinking that in their flattery, they're going to invoke him to go and to answer their question the way that they expected him to answer their question. And in doing so, Jesus sees right through all of it. Why do you think that is? Because Jesus contained all wisdom. He was very aware of what was happening. Proverbs 29:5 says this: a man who flatters his neighbor spreads a net for his feet. If someone's flattering you, they're trying to set you up for something. And these guys, knew exactly what they were doing, and Jesus knew exactly what they didn't say anything that was incorrect. They matter of fact, they were saying something that was very true. Jesus didn't care about the political scene. Jesus wasn't impressed about the laws and rules that man had declared. He was more concerned about what God declared. And so he very, very clearly, very, very pointedly here, he comes and asks the question, we know you're not going to show any favoritism. We know you're going to only say what's right, Jesus. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Guys, think about what the question is. It's a political question. You want to start a fight in any gathering, you just bring up a political question. You just start talking politics. You will, within, especially in today's environment, right? I'm for Hillary. I'm for Trump. There's nothing you're going to say. You're going to have the crowd on either side of that, and you're just going to start a division. And you look at this whole scene. That's exactly what the Pharisees were attempting to do. We'll divide everybody up. We'll just say, hey, we're with Caesar or we're not with Caesar. You pay taxes to Caesar. You don't pay taxes to Caesar. And you bring up the subject of taxes, even in our day. You're going to start a battle. And that's exactly what they were attempting to do. Jesus, pick a side. You're going to side with Caesar. You're going to side with the religious leaders. And if you side with one of the two, it'll end up being, you separating half of the group that's with you. And Jesus knew exactly what they were attempting to do. And anytime you're trying to trap Jesus, again, you're in bad territory. You're not going to do it, right? How many people try to trap Jesus? And I get it all the time as a pastor. People want to ask you some question I think they're going to stump you with. How many angels fit on the pin of a needle? Who cares, right? But we got you there. You don't know how to answer that question. It's just some dumb. They think they're coming with some really, really educated question that's going to get Jesus to have to, make a decision to split the crowd, to get everybody against him. And then watch what it says in verse 23. But Jesus, perceived their craftiness. He goes, I know exactly what you guys are doing. You guys plotted this whole thing out. Jesus is aware of it. And he said, why do you test me? Well, why are you trying to put, a test to me? That's crazy. Because testing Jesus or testing God, you're in the losing end of the test, right? And so Jesus, again, he says, show me a denarius. Now, think about this. He's conversing with these guys that were acting to be righteous. And he says, they're asking him, hey, Jesus, is it okay to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Jesus goes, show me a denarius. And they would literally have to go into their bag or pocket or whatever they had their money in, and they would pull out a coin that had Caesar's inscription on it. Now here's the deal. The Jews considered an image, according to the Old Testament, of anybody to be idolatry. So if you had a picture of Caesar on a coin that you had in your pocket, you were the one engaged in idolatry yourself. And so he has them go in and search out, and they, hey, whose image is on that? Caesar's, right? The very guy that the way we're trying to trap you, and yet we're walking around with his coins in our pocket. Hypocrisy. Right off the bat, he catches them in their hypocrisy. And then he asks the question, whose image is on it? Caesar's? And then Jesus just simply says, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. If it's got Caesar's image on it, who does it belong to? Caesar. Now, what you don't find in this particular text is that image would also had an inscription around it. And the inscription would read, T. Caesar Divi av F. Augustus. Now, I'll translate that for you. Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus. Caesar had taken on upon himself divinity. Think about that. He was considered himself a god. And these guys are walking around with the coins of Caesar in their pocket with that inscription on it. And what's incredible as you look at this whole picture and as you look at this whole scene is that Jesus declares to them, you know what? If Caesar's the one who's in authority over this land, then you're to give to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. And guys, I think that has application for our own lives, man. You know, we understand as Christians that all authority comes from God. God's the one who establishes the authorities in a nation. And it's not always the one that I want to be in power that's in power, but I understand that God is the one who put him there. When President Obama was in power, God had put him there. I understand that. When President Trump's in power, God's put him there for some reason. I don't agree with it all the time. I don't like some of the policies that they put into place, but I'm convinced that God's in control of all things, and if he's in control of all things, and he's telling them to give to Caesar what Caesar wasn't a good guy. He was a god. He called himself a god. But the Christian community had a responsibility to come under the rule that God had placed over them. Matter of fact, in the book of Romans chapter 13, let me ask you, I think it's important in our environment today to be reminded of these things. Go back to Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13, look at verse 1 with me. Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. Look at verse 4. For he is God's minister to you for good. If you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, watch this, but also for conscience sake. And here's what Paul was writing to the Romans. The Romans, as he's writing this letter, was in Rome, where Caesar had his throne. And where he called himself a god. He says, look, understand something. As a Christian, guys, we have a responsibility to come under the authorities that God has put into place. And if you come under those authorities, then you're going to do what your government's asked you to do, as long as what your government asks you to do doesn't violate what God asks you to do. And that's where the line gets drawn. Anytime the government would ask you to do something that God commanded you not to do, then your responsibility is to take God's command over man's command. In every situation. That I have a greater responsibility to God than I do to a government or to any man. And so You know, I think of the incident in Acts chapter 4. In Acts chapter 4, Peter and John were preaching, and a lame man gets healed, and they get arrested because this lame man gets healed, and they were preaching in the name of Jesus. And in Acts chapter 4, verse 17, it says there in that text, it says, so they spread. So this is the religious leaders speaking, but so that it spreads no further among the people, let us severely threaten them that from now on they speak to no one in this name, the name of Jesus. So they called them, they commanded them not to speak at all, nor teach in the name of Jesus. And Peter and John answered, and they said, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge, for we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. I love that. I love that, because this is what Peter and John said. You know what? God told us to say it, and you're trying to tell us not to say it. We're going to pick God's side over your side no matter what. That's where you and I draw the line as Christians. If they say you can't ever evangelize again, well then take me to jail. Because I'm going to do what God's asked me to do. I don't care what man declares to be true. There comes a line where you say, you know what? I would rather obey God than obey man. And so if it comes to some command that God has instructed, then you're to choose God. If it comes to an immoral act that someone's asking you to do, your government, your employee, they want you to lie or cheat or do something immoral, then you're to obey God over your authority. If they want you to go and, I want you to just you need to fudge a little bit on your on that paperwork in order for you to keep your job, then you know what? God will provide another job for me, because I'm going to do what God's asked me to do above what man's asked me to do. You see, guys, there's lines that are drawn that if we're instructed to do something wrong or immoral, then we're to say, you know what, I can't do that. When it comes to conscience, I think that's the other place. Is we have, I've got several gals here that work in hospitals where they're trying to force them to do and participate in abortions, and they're saying, I can't do that, and they're taking grief for that stand. We've seen that in our culture on many occasions. Well, just the baker that didn't want to participate in a same-sex marriage, and he says, my conscience, I can't do that. And I would rather go to jail. I'd rather pay the fine. I'd rather do whatever. I'll close my business. It doesn't matter, because there's convictions that I have that I'm not willing to compromise for any man. And that's your conscience, that if you violate that, man, then you've sold out. And there's some things in our conscience that you just go, you know what, I can't do it. It's not that I hate anybody or don't like anybody. It's that I have convictions that something's true, and I can't go against my convictions and what God says. And so these are things that you and I are instructed, we're to give to Caesar what's Caesar's. And you guys, when it comes tax time, we're to pay our taxes. Be good citizens. Be outstanding citizens. Do the things that are right. But do it for conscience sake. Do it because you know it's right. Don't do it because I'm following what. Think about how much press that one verse has got. Give to Caesar the things that belongs to Caesar. Even the secular world quotes Jesus there. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and it's true, and we should. And it should be something that we're doing because not because we're doing it for man, we're doing it for God, because that's what He's declared. And we benefit from the taxes we pay as well. The roads that go in, the thank God that there's certain regulations on food that, I'm not going to get salmonella, hopefully, or get some bad meat, or thank God for some of these regulations that are that our government takes care of, and we benefit from those things, and we should be helping support. And I think it's a biblical concept. Give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. I think the government crosses its line at times when it comes to conscience things, but and those are areas where that's where I draw the line. Now, I read a story of a man who wrote He was having a guilty conscience. He wrote a letter to the IRS. He says, "Dear sir, my conscience has bothered me. Here is the $175 that I owe in back taxes. P.S. If my conscience is still bothering me, I'll send you the rest." I think sometimes we approach, the whole, I'll just they'll see if I can get away with this or I can get away with it. God's saying, be upstanding. Give to Caesar the things that belong to Caesar. But the second part of that, guys, is the most important part of that. He says, and render to God the things that are God's. Let me ask you. If Caesar put his inscription on a coin, whose inscription has been placed on you? Here's what the Bible says, Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. You know whose image you were made in? God's. You got God's stamp on you. And if you got God's stamp on you, then he owns you. Render to him what's due him. You were created in the image of the Almighty. And therefore, you and I are owned by him. Our life doesn't belong to ourselves. And if you've given your life to Jesus Christ, that's true of you. If you're one who said, you know what, God, I surrender. My life, is not my own anymore. I've asked you to come in and dwell inside of me. You have God's image stamped on you. And God isn't interested in just you giving him, your leftovers. He's not interested. I gave my tithe. I gave my time. I gave my talent. I gave, and I'm giving these things to God. No, God doesn't need any of those things from us. God doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your service. You know what God's looking for? You. He wants you. He wants all of you. He wants for your life to be surrendered over to him so that he can guide your steps and direct your path. And it's amazing to me that we can come to this place where we think, well, I did my duty. I gave my time. I gave my tithe. I gave my this. And we think that we've done what God's asked of us by doing that thing. I go to church once a week. What more do you want from me? No, God wants you. He wants all of you. And you're to render him what's his. In the book of 1 Corinthians, it say, you were bought at a price, therefore glorify God in your body, which are his. He paid for you. You're not giving him something that is obligated for you to give to him. He wants all of you. I remember years and years ago, my brother, we were just teenagers. He was just a teenager, in his early 20s probably, and he didn't want to go to church, but he would send his tithe with my mom to church. It's like, give to God. It was his. And my mom came back one day and she says, you know what? The pastor told me that he didn't want that. I go, what do you mean he told you he didn't want that? Well, he was talking in a sermon and he said, you know what? God doesn't want your money. He wants your heart. And I remember hearing that and it impacted. I wasn't even a believer then. I just kind of like, oh, that's serious. Right? That's serious. I mean, it's not just about, God, I'm paying you. God doesn't want to be paid by you. He wants you. He wants your heart. Because he made you not for this world, he's made you for heaven. And he's in this process of making you the person that he desires you to be, conformed to the image of his son. And that's the only way you and I can be heaven bound, is if we're in this process of being conformed into the image of His Son. There's an incredible passage in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. I'm going to ask you to turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And I think this passage kind of summarizes that whole thought and that whole picture. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, beginning in the 45th verse. Let's go all the way up there. Verse 45. And so it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. The last Adam became a life-giving spirit. However, the spiritual is not first, but the natural, and afterward the spiritual. The first man was of the earth, made of dust. The second man is the Lord from heaven. And as was the man of dust, so also are those who are made of dust. And as it is the heavenly man, so also are those who are heavenly. And this is the picture, and we'll read the rest of that. There's an incredible thought here. This is what the writer of Corinthians, Paul the Apostle, is declaring. He says, understand something, man. There's two natures that a person possesses. There's the natural man and there's the spiritual man. And the natural man is something that when you're born, you take on that characteristic of a natural man. You were made of the 23 elements that you find in the dirt. All of us are just a bunch of dirt balls. That's it. And we're all dirt balls that have a fallen nature in us. We have the tendency and the propensity towards sin. That's who we are. We're all broken and fallen. And none of us are exempt from it. Just like Adam sinned against God, we all sin against God. It was passed down through the lineage. It's a natural man. But there's also the second Adam, the heavenly man. And just like you took on the natural characteristics of Adam in sin, you can take on the spiritual characteristics of Jesus as you ask Him to come into your heart. And you become not just a natural man, but you become a spiritual man, a spiritual woman. You become someone who's taken on a nature that your eyes aren't fixed upon and fixated upon the things of this world, but your eyes are fixed on and fixated upon the things that are heavenly. So that you take on a different priority, a different perspective. And notice what he says in the next verse. He says, verse 48, as was the man of dust, so also are those who are made of dust. As is the heavenly man, so also are those who are made heavenly. Verse 49, and as we have borne the image of the man of dust, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly man. Wow. We shall bear the image of the heavenly man. That's future. And we're in the process right now, guys, of being changed. But one day when you leave this earth, you take on a glorified body and you become a heavenly body and you become a changed person because of what Jesus Christ does in you. And this image has been stamped on you. It's been stamped on you, Christian. And you're to render to God the things that are God's. And I think a very appropriate question in this whole text for every one of us this morning is, man, am I rendering to God what's His? Am I? Am I living my life in a way that is pleasing to God? Am I living my life in a way that God is being honored by what I'm giving to Him? And my not just the things, but me. Is that true of my life and my existence this morning? And I think it's an important question for all of us this morning, that we would just evaluate that. I think Jesus, think about Jesus as confronting all of these religious leaders. Next week, and I was going to try to get them both together with just too much with communion this morning, because after the Pharisees fail and the Herodians fail, the Sadducees say, let us have a go at it. And the Sadducees are going to come and try to trap Jesus again. And there's another trap being set for Jesus, and Jesus turns the table on them too. And it's just classic. I love the whole passage that we're looking at the next 2 weeks. But one of the things that amazed me in this whole picture is that he's wanting them to get their eyes off of just the political stuff. And he wants them to put on the eternal stuff. And it's so easy for us to get caught up in the political stuff. I get asked the question, you a Democrat, you're a Republican, are you a right winger, you're a left winger? Are you where do you stand on this and this? Let me tell you something. I don't really associate with Republican or Democrat anymore. Let me tell you where I'm a Biblican. That's it. I'm a Biblican. I thought about saying a biblerat, but that didn't fit too well. I'm a Biblican because this is what I'm going to hold to be true. It doesn't matter what party it is. It matters, does it line up with what God says? Because that's where I'm going to make my stand. And if we would line up with what God says, man, it doesn't matter what association, affiliation, or party that you associate. It matters, man. You know what? When it comes to the issues of life, when it comes to the issues of morality, when it comes to the issues of what God declares, which side am I going to stand on? And I pray that I would always stand on God's side. And I pray you would always stand on God's side. It doesn't matter what you grew up as. It doesn't matter what your mom and dad or your grandma and grandpa were, man. What does God say? Because that is where I want to draw my line. And if I can stand on that line, man, when it's all said and done, I will be in association with the heavenly man rather than the natural man. And may that be where you and I draw the line, Christian. Let me tell you, we're living in times where things are changing. Things are changing rapidly. Culture's changing. People are disregarding what God says, and they're declaring, by state or by law or by government or by rule what right and wrong is. But that doesn't change God ever. That doesn't change from God's perspective. And then you and I got to decide, man, whose side am I going to land on? Which side am I going to associate with? Whose side am I going to line up my life with? And I pray that it would always be. We got great freedoms in this country. You can choose. You can choose your leaders. We can choose your life. We still have the freedom to gather together. We still have the freedom to voice our opinions. And thank God for all of that. That's the freedoms we've been given. And that's not true in every country. I've been in countries where it's against the law to proselytize. It's against the law to share your faith. It's against the law to, and you come back to America, you realize, man, we've been given a lot of freedoms. But the greater thing is who am I rendering my life to? Who is it that I'm living my life for? And what are my priorities?